let's get started. We'll be talking today about how to search online, tips for searching. We're going to talk about keywords. We're going to talk about Booleans. If you're new here, this is our third session in our flexible learning course series. We are First Draft. We are a global nonprofit that tries to give people and organizations the tools to be resilient against harmful and misleading information. We're really excited about this course because it's new. It's all about vaccine misinformation, how to report on it, how to monitor it, how to verify it. So we have a lot of different things planned for you guys over the course of these sessions. But today we're going to talk about searching. So we're going to talk about 4 things today. Firstly, we're going to talk about keywords. So how you can use keywords more strategically in your searching. Then we're going to talk about Boolean queries. If you haven't heard of Boolean queries before, that's fine. This is going to be like a crash course for you. And if you have heard of them before, hopefully you'll learn some new tips and tricks. That's going to be one of the main things we talk about today. Then we're going to talk about sources. So what does it mean when we say sources if we're doing research online, right? And then finally, we're going to talk about site searches and quote searches. And these are 2 of the tools that our team uses in our monitoring basically every day. They're 2 of our biggest tricks. So we'll talk about how to use those and how to use them in sort of creative ways as well. So hopefully this is going to be a session that is useful to everyone, regardless of whether you're researching vaccine misinformation or not, because these skills are sort of universally applicable. So my name is Shadanae Urbani. Once again, I am the Partnerships and Programs Manager for First Draft. I'm based in New York City. That's my Twitter handle right there if you want to get in touch with me. We're also going to be providing some information about First Draft generally at the end of this at the end of this presentation, excuse me, some resources for you, also a contact email. So we're always happy to hear from you guys. So let's jump into it. So we're going to start off with talking about keywords and using keywords strategically. So a search is only as good as your keywords. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially, when we're doing research, when we're doing search queries online, we build them from keywords, right? And that's obvious, but there are actually ways you can be really strategic and really creative with the keywords that you're using. So we're going to talk about just some tips and tricks to remember when you're building your search queries and when you're doing monitoring for vaccine misinformation. So let's just talk about some examples to start. So if I wanted to research what people were saying about COVID-19 online, there are a lot of different ways you could do that, right? So I've listed some basic keywords here, and let's just look at some of them. So we have coronavirus, obviously, but we also have misspellings of coronavirus, right? There's a lot of misspellings that happen online. So when we're doing especially searches on social media, we think about misspellings a lot because if there are common misspellings, we still want to be able to capture that information when we're trying to, sort of think about the discourse, find what people are talking about, find what the questions people are asking are online. So misspellings is one thing we think about. We also think about just different punctuation and permutations of the same word. So if you do a search on Twitter for COVID-19 without a dash, you're going to get a different set of results than if you search for COVID-19 with a dash. So we try to include all different permutations. And I'm going to give you some tricks later when we talk about Booleans for how you can easily combine all of these different words to make sure you're getting a larger set of search results. We have words about the lockdown, right? Lockdown, quarantine. There may be geographic keywords that you're interested in depending on what you're looking at. We have words that relate to conspiracy, right? A lot of people talk about Bill Gates and depopulation and microchips, right? If you joined our last sessions on the common vaccine narratives and understanding vaccine misinformation, we talked about all the different narratives that have been popular over the last year of the pandemic when talking about COVID-19. There are also words for vaccine developers, right? Words for treatments. So this is just to get your mind going about all the different keywords that could be relevant to a topic. Then just to contrast, I have keywords here on the right that have to do with the mainstream media and media bias. So you might think, oh, well, how could I find posts that are related to people criticizing the media? It's kind of like a theoretical concept. Well, there are lots of words that people tend to use when they're talking about mainstream media. Obviously, mainstream media is one of them, but in the United States, at least, politically correct is a term that comes up a lot. PC as an abbreviation for that. PC Brigade. So we think about abbreviations when we're thinking about keywords online. MSM is an abbreviation for mainstream media. So one of the things that I want you guys to think about is when you're writing your search queries, it's important not just to think about how people talk, but how people talk online, right? People use hashtags, people use abbreviations, people misspell things. So these are all things that can be really important later if you're trying to capture a wide set of search results. Another really important concept is this idea that ideology affects the language that people use. So let's take a look at some examples of this. So on the left, I have a post from a person who is typically pretty pro-vaccine, and I have a post on the right from someone who is skeptical of vaccines. So on the left, we have Chelsea Clinton, and if you read her tweet, it says, "It's not too much to ask. Please hashtag believe nurses, hashtag mask up, be a flu fighter, and vaccinate yourself and your family." So there are a bunch of keywords that she's using in this post alone, right? She says believe nurses. That's a hashtag. She says mask up. She says flu fighter. I had never heard that before, but when I look at this post, I think, oh, that is a key word that this person who is pro-vaccine is using. Perhaps if I include that in my search queries next time, I will capture other posts of people who are pro-vaccine who are talking about the vaccine, right? The other interesting thing is that often people of a certain ideology will use words to describe the other side of the spectrum as well, right? So often when people who support vaccines talk about people who are skeptical of vaccines or anti-vaccine, they use the term anti-vaxxer. I'm sure you all have heard this term by now, and if you haven't, this is at least a very popular term in the United States. But if you look at the discourse of people who are skeptical of the vaccine or planning not to take the vaccine, this isn't a term that they use very often to describe themselves. You see things more often like vaccine choice, or one term that this person uses in their post is medical freedom, or vaccine skeptics, right? So even the language that people use to refer to themselves can differ depending on who is talking, right? And why is this important? Well, if you're looking for, posts about vaccines on Facebook, and the words that you include in your search are only words from one side of the spectrum, your search results are going to turn up posts from that side of the spectrum, and they're not going to capture this whole other group of people who's talking, right? And it goes both ways. If you do a search for vaccine choice or hashtag vaccine injuries or medical freedom, you're probably not going to get posts from people who are more likely to use words like vaccine hesitancy or anti-vaxxer. And that's fine, because sometimes we want to, yield a specific set of results with our searches, but it's important to understand so that you know that your data set might be skewed a little bit or your results might be skewed a little bit. That's really important. And you can always be on the lookout for new keywords too. So this is something that our team is constantly doing. We're constantly trying to understand the language that people are using on social media to make our research better. So as an example, this is a post I found from a Facebook page called Learn the Risk. It's a page that appears to focus on possible or potential risks of vaccines. And I was reading this post and I just took note of a number of phrases and keywords. So one phrase that they use is profits before people. And if you came to our previous sessions, we talk about how one of the main narratives framing vaccine discourse is a concern about profit and a concern that profits might be, interfering with the responsible development of vaccines. Whether or not you disagree, that is a common critique and a common narrative that people are using to talk about vaccines. So if we're interested in researching that and digging into it further, it helps to understand and be able to search for phrases like this that will bring up those posts that people are making online. Side effects, this is sort of a more obvious one, but side effects is a very common topic when we're talking about vaccines. So that might be a keyword that you incorporate in your searches. And then what was really interesting to me about this post was these 3 words here. So they're talking about the brain barrier, encephalopathy, and neurological changes. And for me, as a researcher, I had never really come across these concepts or these ideas in relation to vaccines before. I'm not sure I even know what encephalopathy is, right? So that's a signal to me that, hey, these are new keywords that might be worth paying attention to and incorporating into my searches. Maybe people are really concerned about the brain barrier, right? Maybe so many people are concerned about it that really we should have more reporting on what that means in relation to vaccines, or more communications from health officials about what that means, right? A part of this process, just like we talked about last time, is being able to become more thoughtful communicators when we talk about vaccines. Because when we're trying to get out good information to the public, it helps to know what people's concerns are, right? And people's concerns can often be understood in terms of the language that they're using about it, right? I know that these concepts are a little bit obvious in a way, but I think that it helps to break it down and really show how it manifests in the form of keywords, because that's what's going to help make our research better. So how do we actually build good search queries? One way of doing searches is called Boolean queries. And Boolean queries are basically a way of writing your searches that use specific operators, and I'm going to talk about what that means. It's a way of writing your queries so that you are finding really specific results. So Boolean queries involve using 2 operators, and or in capital letters. So what we're going to be doing is stringing keywords together using and or in specific ways. So what do these 2 things do when you put them in a search string? And limits your results. So for example, if I were to type into my Google search bar, vaccine and, in capital letters, injury, Google is going to spit back at me results that include both the word vaccine and the word injury. The results have to include both of those terms. So the reason I say and limits your results is because when a search platform sees this operator, it says, okay, I need to have both of these terms that she is using in order to show them to her, right? On the other hand, we have or. Or is a search operator that expands your results. So if I were to type into Google, Moderna or Pfizer, Google is going to say, okay, I'm going to give you back results that include either the word Moderna or the word Pfizer. So you don't need both of them, you just need one or the other. And one thing I should mention that I forgot is that Boolean queries work on a lot of different search platforms. So they work on Google, they definitely work on Twitter, they work on Reddit, if Reddit is a popular platform in your country. They don't work on Facebook. If you have CrowdTangle and use CrowdTangle as a way to monitor Facebook, there is a way to use Boolean operators. But unfortunately, this way of writing searches is not going to work on Facebook, but it does work on Google, it does work on Twitter, and lots of other platforms. And if you're interested in understanding which platforms you can do this with, all you have to do is search, the name of the platform and, does it support Boolean queries? So when I talk about this, I'm going to talk about this mainly in terms of doing these searches on Google or on Twitter, because that's often how I use them, right? So and or. So and narrows your results and or expands your results. It says, I'm interested in either of these words. This says, I'm interested in both of these words. There's a third operator we use, not as often, but it is useful, and it is the minus sign or not. And it depends which platform you're using, which one it supports. So on Twitter and Google, they both use the minus sign. Some platforms use the not, but we're mainly gonna be talking about the minus sign. So what's an example of this? So if I were to search in Twitter, vaccine space minus Moderna, without a space in between here, that's going to give me every post that includes the word vaccine, but doesn't include the word Moderna. So maybe I'm only interested in posts, about the Pfizer vaccine or AstraZeneca, right? And those might be words that I include. But if I want to make sure I don't include any posts that use the word Moderna, then I use this minus sign, and that makes sure I don't see those results. So those are the three main operators. So let's talk about a couple other things you can do. So parentheses. So parentheses let you combine and or searches. So this is where Booleans get really useful. You can combine and operators. So if you look at this query we have Moderna or Pfizer, in parentheses, and injury or harm. So what this is going to do is it's going to tell the platform, okay, I want to see results that use the word Moderna or the word Pfizer, but also use the word injury or harm. So you're basically telling the platform, I want to see posts that has one of these words, but also one of these words. So it's basically like you're giving different categories, and you're giving options within those categories. And you're saying, I want at least one of the words in these different categories, right? So this query is going to spit back results about these different vaccines that are talking about injury or harm. And we can write longer queries that really help us find exactly what we're looking for. So this might look intimidating as a search string, but if you break it down, it's actually simple. So you can see we have one group of words here, all separated by or, and one group of words here, all separated by or. And you can see that these first words are all words that are about different vaccines. And the second group of words are all words that are about harm or injury, right? So we're telling the platform, okay, I want to see posts that are about vaccines, and they can use any of these words, but I also want to see posts that have words about harm. And that could be injury, harm, death, side effects, autism, Bell's palsy, brain barrier, right? So I've included a word that I just learned by paying attention to the posts that I was seeing in my search query. And this is the way we do our research at First Draft. We pay attention to language, and then we include that language in the searches that we do online. And And so, yeah, so you can see I've included brain barrier. I've also included encephalopathy. So I'm trying to work in these terms that are new to me, but maybe interesting to see how people are talking about them. I also include misspellings. So some people mistakenly spell AstraZeneca with a K. If I didn't include this term, I wouldn't capture those social media posts. So one thing to remember is that Booleans are, you have to think of them in a way that's iterative. So if you're writing a query like this, you're going to make a mistake probably. You're going to forget a parentheses, or maybe you didn't include enough words, you didn't include enough options. But mistakes will be made, or sometimes the results aren't just quite what you're looking for. And so you have to be comfortable with that, and you just have to kind of tweak them as you go. And it's an art more than it is a science. So as you're embarking on this journey of learning Booleans and using them in your searches, I just implore you to be patient with yourself. So some reminders. Always put your Boolean operators in capital letters. That's something you really need to do. Remember that or expands your results and limits your results. One thing I didn't mention specifically is you need to use quotation marks if you're searching for a phrase instead of a word. So in this example, brain barrier, I've put that in quotation marks because it's more than one word. So if something is one word, you don't need the quotes, but if it's more than one word, you do. You can also incorporate words like me, my, and I into your Boolean queries. And that can be kind of like a trick to find people who are talking about their eyewitness experiences. So for example, if you're a reporter and you're looking for people who just got the vaccine, who are talking about their experience, you might add as an option a parentheses that says me or my or I, and then that will surface those posts who are using these personal pronouns. Group similar keywords in parentheses, and also check your work. So if this feels overwhelming, I hope you join us next time because we're going to talk about Boolean queries a little bit more, and we're going to do some live practice. So there will be an opportunity to talk about it more. So just a couple more concepts. One is to think about sources online. So when we think about sources as reporters, we often mean, experts, right? Or, the people we call on the phone when we're interviewing someone for a story, right? Online, sources are just the different accounts and places you can go to see discourse about vaccines. And there are lots of them, right? So there's obvious platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Google, right? But there are also other platforms like Telegram, there's WhatsApp, right? There's Gab. Gab is kind of like the alternative to Twitter, right? For people who don't want to be on Twitter. There's TikTok now. We have new platforms every day. Clubhouse is now becoming a thing. So I just encourage you to think about all the different platforms you can search. And these may be different depending on what country you live in, right? Because different platforms are popular in different ways depending on the country. Just to finish off, I want to talk about two last tricks, and these are site searches and quote searches. So a site search is a trick that we use when we're doing advanced searches in Google. And a site search is basically a way to search for posts within a specific URL. So what we do is we write site : we write the URL that we want to search within, and then we write our search terms. And you can see that I've actually written our search terms in terms of a Boolean query. So I have vaccine and UK here. And one of the really helpful things about site searches is it's a way to sort of sneakily search Facebook. And I say sneakily because I said earlier that using Booleans doesn't work on Facebook, right? But it does work on Google. So if you do a site search of a Facebook URL, and then you combine it with a Boolean, that will work. So what does this query I wrote here do? Well, this looks within Facebook pages for pages that are talking about vaccines and the United Kingdom. So every Facebook page on Facebook starts with facebook.com/pages in its URL. Then it'll say something else, right? Like it'll be slash something else. It'll include the title of the page. But every page on Facebook has this in its URL. You could also just do facebook.com and it would search vaccine in UK for, you know, anything within facebook.com. But say we're just interested in specific pages, we would use this URL. You can see some relevant results came up. One thing that came up in Google search results is UK vaccination information. And you can do this with quote searches as well. So remember when I was talking about Booleans, I said if you use more than one word, you have to use quotation marks around it. Well, quotation marks is a handy trick in general for searching for a phrase exactly as it's written. So if I want to see posts that specifically use the phrase vaccine choice, it could be even a longer phrase as well. But if I'm interested in seeing posts that say vaccine choice exactly, I can include that in quotation marks and combine it with a site search. And then there you have it. Google will pull up results for Facebook pages that talk about vaccine choice.